If you think you've heard every frontier tale, stay close, because the poor old whaler they laughed at in a frozen outpost didn't lose his fortune. He buried it, and the men who came to take his last coin would soon freeze for a reason that wasn't weather. Subscribe now and join this channel. We tell historical mysteries of the Arctic frontier, where one quiet act of kindness can summon a whole community from the white silence. Drop a quick comment with where you're watching from. The trading post at Chiikiktajuak Bay sat like a crooked nail driven into winter. One pier, a low storehouse, whale oil barrels stacked like black teeth, and smoke that never rose straight because the wind wouldn't allow it. Places like this weren't towns so much as bargains, goods for survival, silence for safety. He arrived near dusk when the sun turned the ice a bruised blue and the dogs began their throat-deep barking. The old man walked behind a small sled, as if the sled was walking him. His coat was patched with sealskin and canvas in the way a man patches a life, whatever holds. The younger traders watched from the doorway, reading poverty in the careful way he moved. "Another washed-up whaler," someone muttered. "Too old to hunt, too proud to beg." That was the contradiction. He looked like a man with nothing, but he didn't move like one. He didn't scan faces for mercy. He didn't flinch at laughter. He stood on the hard-packed snow and waited for the wind to finish speaking, as if he understood the language it used on skin. Inside the post, the clerk tried to place him in the usual boxes: New Bedford, Nantucket, Hudson Bay men, deserter, drifter. The old man offered no story. He slid a small pouch onto the counter. A few worn coins, a bone needle, and a strip of dried maktak wrapped in cloth. The clerk scoffed. Trade was supposed to be fox and ivory, not a poor man's food. The old whaler's eyes lifted, calm as a lead-grey sea. "It's not food," he said. "It's respect." The Inuit woman by the kulik, there to barter mittens stitched with sinew, paused. Her needle stopped mid-stitch. "In the north, sharing isn't charity. It's a rule older than any flag. You offer what you have because tomorrow the storm may choose you." The old man placed the maktak on a tin plate near the heat, not for himself, but for the woman's child who sat quiet as a shadow, cheeks cracked with cold. He didn't ask permission. He didn't announce his goodness. He simply fed a hungry kid like it was as ordinary as breathing. The traders didn't know what to do with that. Kindness made them nervous. It felt like a trick. One dockhand laughed and called him grandfather, like it was an insult. The old man nodded once, accepting the name the way a sailor accepts weather, without arguing. He paid for one night's corner on the floor. No whiskey, no cards. When the clerk shoved a battered tin cup at him, the old man cleaned it first with snow, slow and thorough, as if even a cup deserved dignity. Then he sat with his back to the wall, eyes open, listening. Outside, the tide groaned under the ice. A dog team passed in the dark, runners whispering. Somewhere across the bay, a drumbeat rolled from a gathering, steady and patient, like a heart reminding the night that people were still here. The old man's hand drifted toward his collar for half a second, almost unconsciously, as if checking something he kept close. Then he stopped himself. The movement was small, but it was the first crack in his silence. And in a place where everyone watches everyone, one pair of eyes had already noticed that gesture, and the thin, dark edge of a mark beneath his sleeve when the firelight flickered. The men who laughed the loudest were rarely the ones who lasted long on this coast. Before the lamp burned down, the old whaler felt it again, the weight of someone's gaze, the way you feel thin ice before it speaks. He kept his hands folded, breathing quiet. The trading post was a box of heat and suspicion, boards creaking, the kulik hissing, a needle whispering through hide. Across the room, the Inuit woman drew her child closer, not afraid of him, afraid for him. Outside, the wind pressed at the walls like it wanted in. Then the elder entered. He wasn't tall, but the room shifted around him. His hair was white as frost, his parka trimmed in fur, worn smooth by decades of storms. He carried no weapon. People moved for him anyway. "Ulakut," he greeted. "Ulakut," a few answered. His eyes went to the old whaler, not to judge him, to measure him. The clerk tried to make it simple. "Kalunak," just a broke whaler. The elder didn't reply. He watched the child chewing the strip of maktak, watched the whaler's face stay hard. almost stern, as if kindness was duty and not theatre. That was the contradiction. A poor man usually clings. This one gave first. When the elder turned, firelight caught the whaler's sleeve as he shifted. For a blink, a sliver of skin showed at the inside of his wrist, and something tied there. Not jewelry, not a trader's charm. A small toggle of caribou bone, polished by years of touch, bound with sinew darkened like smoked hide. 3 tiny cuts were carved into it, simple marks, the kind you miss unless you know to look. The elder knew. His expression didn't change, but his steps stopped. The room waited for him to speak, and he didn't. Silence from an elder here was not emptiness. It was a warning held in the hand. He reached out, not grabbing, fingers hovering near the toggle as if asking permission without words. The whaler moved fast, faster than an old man should, covering it. For the first time, his calm sharpened. "No," he said. The elder nodded once, as if the refusal confirmed something. He sat near the quillick and warmed his hands. The clerk pushed again, louder. "What is it? A lucky bone?" The elder looked at him the way you look at a boy bragging near a ledge. "Not luck," he said. "A debt." The word landed heavy. The traders exchanged glances. Debt was their language. Money, leverage. But the elder's tone wasn't about coins. It was about breath, about nights when the sea tries to take your name. The whaler stared into the flame as if seeing another winter inside it. The elder spoke again, softer, in Inuktitut, for those who could hear it properly. The woman with the needle stopped. A young hunter by the door lowered his eyes. Only one phrase carried clear enough for the Kalunat to catch. "He was marked to live." The clerk forced a laugh. "Marked by who?" The elder didn't answer. He rose and, before leaving, set a small piece of dried char on the plate beside the maktak. Sharing back, a circle closed. At the threshold, he looked over his shoulder at the whaler. "You kept it hidden," he said in English. "But the ice does not hide what the sea remembers." Then he stepped into the night. Out on the hard snow, the elder paused beside a small inuksuk that guided travelers towards safer ice. Farther down the shore, the earlier drumbeat faltered, and even the playful edge of katajak, throat-song laughter, seemed to fade, as if the village itself had felt a thread pulled tight. Outside, the dogs went quiet, one by one. And somewhere beyond the pier, a shadow detached from a barrel stack, someone who had been listening, someone who understood only one part of what was said, debt and a mark. Morning came thin and pale, the kind of light that doesn't warm anything, but still reveals every mistake. The outpost woke to the scrape of boots and the breath of dogs, to the smell of whale oil and wet rope. Men argued over prices, over whose boat would go out first when the ice loosened, over rumors carried by the last sled from the south. The old whaler stepped outside, and the cold bit him like an old enemy. He didn't curse it. He simply tightened his scarf and walked toward the edge of the bay where the ice met black water in a narrow lead. A few Inuit boys were stacking snow blocks for a windbreak, laughing between gusts. A woman knelt by a sled, tying a strap with fingers so red they looked burned. Her name was Aputi. People called her Widow before they called her anything else. Her husband had gone through new ice 2 weeks earlier, and the sea had not returned him. The traders spoke of it as loss of labor. The Inuit spoke of it as a silence in the family, a missing voice at the kulik. Aputi's youngest, a girl no more than 6, sat on the sled with eyes too old for her face. The child's boots were split at the seams. The woman tried to hide it, pulling the hem of her parka down as if shame could keep frostbite away. The old whaler stopped. He saw the torn boot, saw the way the girl kept her toes lifted to avoid pressure, saw the mother pretending not to notice because noticing made it real. He opened his pack and took out a strip of thick sealskin he'd been saving to patch his own coat. He tore it clean with a short knife, then sat right there in the snow and began stitching. Bone needle, sinew thread, the same quiet work he'd watched Inuit hands do for years. Aputi stiffened. "No," she said, "because pride is also a kind of shelter." He didn't argue, he kept stitching. "You don't pay for weather," he said, "and you don't pay for a child's feet." The woman's eyes flickered. Anger, gratitude, fear of what help might cost. Then she turned her face away so he wouldn't see it soften. When he finished, he pressed the repaired boot into the girl's hands. The child looked at him like he'd handed her fire. She whispered, "Kujanamik," and the word hit him harder than the wind. He nodded once, the way men nod when they've nearly drowned and don't want anyone to know. That small act should have ended there, but nothing ends cleanly in a trading post. From the doorway of the storehouse, 2 men watched. Not traders, too clean in their arrogance, too restless. Their coats were good, but not earned. One had a scar that looked like a rope burn across his throat. The other chewed tobacco like he was trying to grind his thoughts into dust. "See that?" Scar-Throat murmured. "Old fool carries gear worth stealing. Needle like that, sinew like that means he's got more, or he's got caches. Or he's got no one," the other said, eyes narrowing. "No family, no crew, no friends, just a bed on the floor and a bag he keeps close." They followed him with their gaze as he walked back toward the post, slow, unbothered. They didn't see what the elder had seen. They didn't care about debts that weren't written on paper. They only understood the math of a lonely man in a hard place. Behind them, the wind shifted and carried the faint rhythm of a drum from the village side of the bay, steady, patient, like footsteps on snow. Scar-Throat spat. "Tonight," he said. "We take what he's hiding. If he's broke, we get his coins. If he's lying, we get everything." And far across the ice, unseen in the grey daylight, a lone figure paused beside an Inuksuk and turned his head toward the outpost, as if listening to a threat the Kalunat thought they'd whispered safely. Night didn't drop here the way it did down south. It seeped in until the trading post became a warm box surrounded by endless white. The whaling sheds crouched near the shore, doors rimmed with frost, air thick with oil and salt. The old whaler waited for the room to quiet. No cards, no drink, no stories. When he stepped outside, the dogs lifted their heads but didn't bark. Across the bay, a Quillic flame glowed through a window. Somewhere farther off, a drumbeat carried on the wind, soft, patient. He headed toward the sheds with a small bag and a coil of rope. The moon was a pale smear behind cloud. The ice under his boots creaked in the language of pressure. He listened. Scar-Throat and the chewer followed, slipping between barrel stacks. A third man waited by the shed door, pretending to smoke. Their plan was simple. No witnesses, no loud violence, just a bad patch of ice and a missing bag. The North swallows accidents without questions. When the whaler reached the shed, the third man stepped out, blocking him. "Evening, Grandpa," he said, voice syruped with insult. "You're wandering the wrong side of the pier." The whaler stopped. He didn't reach for a weapon because he didn't carry one. "Move," he said. Scar-Throat came behind him, knife low. "Hand over what you've got. Coins, papers, any little trinkets you keep close." The chewer chuckled. "We ain't cruel. We'll leave you the rope." That was the contradiction. They thought cruelty meant blood. Out here, cruelty meant taking a man's warmth, his food, his way home. The whaler's gaze drifted past them to a darker seam on the bay, a tide crack running like a scar across the ice. Then he looked back. "You want my bag?" he said. "Take it where the ice is honest." Scar-Throat frowned. "What's that mean?" "It means," the whaler replied, "I won't be robbed in a doorway like a drunk. If you're men, follow." He turned and walked away from the sheds, out onto open ice, slow, steady, refusing to run. They followed, boots crunching, breath smoking. The wind shoved spindrift around their ankles. The whaler stopped at a spot that looked like nothing, just snow over blue. He knelt, pressed his gloved palm to the surface, and listened. Then he rose and stepped toward the tide seam in a path that was narrow, deliberate. "Give it!" Scar-Throat hissed. The whaler lifted the bag with one hand. With the other, he tossed the rope coil onto the ice beside the crack. "You'll need that more than I will," he said. The third man lunged for the bag. The whaler let it go. No struggle, no pleading. The outlaw's confidence surged until the ice spoke. A sharp crack split the night. The third man's weight hit a thin skin near the tide seam, and the surface dropped under him like a trap door. He plunged to the waist in black water, screaming as cold clamped his lungs. The chewer stumbled back, arms flailing. Scar-Throat froze, realizing too late the old man had chosen the ground. The whaler didn't laugh. He didn't gloat. He stepped to the edge, calm as a judge, and looped the rope around a pressure ridge with a practiced knot. "Hold," he said. Scarthroat snarled. You did this. I didn't, the whaler answered. The tide did. I just listened. The man in the water clawed at the ice, fingers whitening fast. The whaler braced the rope and stared at Scarthroat. You can pull, he said, or you can watch him die and carry that sound forever. Scarthroat's knife trembled, and when the whaler's wrist flexed against the rope, his sleeve rode up just enough for the lantern light to catch it, a worn bone toggle tied with dark sinew, carved with 3 quiet cuts. The chewer saw it first, and his face emptied of color. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The only sound was the man in the water, ragged breathing, while the bay swallowed his legs and the cold climbed fast. Pull, the whaler said, not loud, just final. Now. Scarthroat hesitated with the knife still in his fist. The chewer stared at the whaler's wrist, at the bone toggle with its 3 cuts, as if something old had surfaced from the ice. His mouth went dry. The whaler didn't wait. He leaned back into the rope and held steady, taking the strain the way a man takes a storm, feet planted, no panic wasted. He could have let the water finish the job. He didn't. That was the North's first rule, one the Inuit live by without preaching it. If your hands can stop a death, you stop it, not for love, for survival. Because tomorrow the wind may choose you. Pikatiginik, working together, isn't a slogan up here. It's the difference between a story told and a name lost. Scarthroat cursed and grabbed the rope. The chewer joined. Together they hauled the 3rd man onto the ice. He lay coughing black water, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. The whaler ripped open the man's coat and shoved the soaked cloth away. From his bag he produced dry moss and a fat wick, struck flint, and coaxed a low flame in his palm, shielding it the way Inuit hands shield a kullik. Small heat, protected, never wasted. He warmed the man's chest and throat, then forced the man's hands under his own armpits. Brutal kindness. Necessary. He murmured a few words under his breath, something learned in storms, the language of people who talk to cold as if it can hear. The chewer whispered, "Why would you help him?" The whaler didn't look up. "Because you don't leave a living thing to suffer for sport. You hunt with respect, or the land takes the debt back. You share, or the next hunger remembers you." He nodded toward the shore where faint smoke lines marked houses. "A vituk, that's how children make it to spring." Scarthroat spat. "We ain't hunting." "No," the whaler replied, eyes flat as sea glass. "A hunt feeds people. What you're doing only feeds fear." The words landed heavy. They'd come for coins, but he spoke like their real poverty was inside them. Scarthroat's gaze snapped again to the wrist. "What is that? Some native charm?" The whaler pulled his sleeve down, hiding the toggle. "It's a reminder," he said. "Up here, sharing isn't weakness. It's law." He glanced at the 3rd man's blue lips. "And the law doesn't care what flag you fly." A gust swept over the bay. Far off, a dog barked once, then stopped, as if someone had laid a hand on its muzzle. The chewer felt it too. The night was listening. The elder's words from earlier, marked to live, echoed in his skull, and suddenly the bone toggle didn't look like a trinket. It looked like permission. The whaler rose, and his calm turned colder than the air. "You tried to make me disappear," he said. "That works in your world. In this world, the ice remembers footsteps. Dogs remember scent. Families remember who gave and who took." He nodded toward the outpost. "Get him back if he freezes. That blood isn't on the tide. It's on you." The outlaws struggled to lift their half-drowned partner. As they staggered away, the whaler turned toward the darker shore, toward the village side, where Inuksuk silhouettes stood like silent witnesses. His hand rose to his chest, 2 fingers touching lightly, a gesture so small it could be mistaken for fixing his collar. But on the ridge above the bay, an answering shape paused, watching, and then slipped behind the snowdrift like a seal under ice. By midday, the story had already been twisted into something safer for thieves. Scarthroat told the dockhands the old whaler had set a man up on bad ice, that he carried hidden money, that he was the kind of drifter who smiled while you froze. Men who wanted an excuse to stay neutral nodded. A trading post survives on not choosing sides. But the Inuit didn't nod. Aputi's sister went straight to the elder's house. He listened, hands steady over the quillick, and answered with one word, Sila, the weather, meaning, let the land judge. That afternoon, the old whaler walked the bay's edge, watching the tide breathe under the ice. Near an Inuksuk that marked safe passage, he slid a strip of cloth under a stone, small, deliberate. In the village, cloth like that meant eyes open without shouting it. 2 boys saw it and ran, not to gossip, but to carry the message. The outlaws pushed harder that night. They didn't come for him first. They came for the widow. 3 shadows moved toward Aputi's lean-to, expecting shouting and fear. Instead, they found the flap open, the inside empty and fresh boot prints leading away across the ice as if she'd fled. Easy, Scarthroat whispered. She ran. He didn't notice the prints were too straight, like someone who knew exactly where the ice was thick. They followed them out beyond the post lights. Wind rose fast, dragging spindrift across their knees. The night tightened. Far off, a drumbeat started, slow and steady. Not a warning to Kalunat ears, but a heartbeat to anyone who understood. Then the ice groaned, long and deep, like a door opening under the world. Ahead, a low glow appeared. A quillick flame sheltered behind snow blocks, a warm promise in the cold. Someone's here, the chewer breathed. Scarthroat smiled. Good. They stepped forward and hit slush. The snow hid thin skin over tidal water. They tried to step back, but their own tracks had softened under the rising tide. The safe line had shifted, and behind them the wind erased what little certainty they had. A man can shoot in the dark. He can't shoot his way back onto solid ice. On the ridge above, silhouettes appeared, quiet, spaced like cairns. No rifles lifted, just presence. Inuit hunters, faces wrapped, and a dog team standing still with the discipline of animals trained for survival, not show. The old whaler stepped into view last, lantern held low so the light touched the ice at their feet. You followed tracks you didn't understand, he said. That's how men vanish out here. Scarthroat raised his pistol, shaking. Back off. A gun won't warm you, the whaler replied, and it won't stop the tide. He crouched, scraped snow aside, and revealed tiny ice chips set like beads, markers used to read thickness when wind erases everything else. There's a safe path, he said, pointing. Single file, slow, no panic. Pikataginik, together, or not at all. Why help us? The chewer asked, voice cracking. The whaler's eyes went to the black water creeping around their boots. Because the old rules still matter, he said. You don't make widows for sport. You don't steal from children. You take only what you can honor. And you don't blame the sea when it answers. A hunter spoke softly in Inuktitut. The dog team shifted, blocking the wrong direction like a living fence. The outlaws understood without translation. Choose the path offered, or the bay takes you. Scarthroat swallowed, lowering the pistol. The lantern light caught the whaler's wrist. Carved bone, dark sinew, a glimpse of cuts. The outlaws' faces tightened. They weren't afraid of the men on the ridge. They were afraid of what that mark meant, and the name it dragged out of memory. Scarthroat tried to smile like nothing mattered, but his teeth wouldn't cooperate. The tide had spared them, the ridge had watched them, and still he clung to the old lie that a gun made him king. The contradiction was sharp. An hour ago they were hunters, loud and certain. Now they were the ones being guided, quiet, obedient, following a line of ice chips like children following an elder's finger. The old whaler kept the lantern low and walked ahead, not as a captor, but as a man escorting strangers away from death. 2 Inuit hunters held the flanks at a distance, faces wrapped, eyes steady. No rifles lifted. In the north, silence is often the hardest warning. Even the dogs stayed still, harnesses taut, reading breath and fear. Far off, an Inuksuk stood like a dark thumb against the moonlit drift, pointing the way the land approved. At a pressure ridge, the whaler stopped, knelt and pressed his palm to the ice, listening for the hollow note that means danger. Sila, the weather, shifted, and the wind pushed spindrift across their ankles, as if trying to wipe the scene clean. Scarthroat slipped on glare ice. The whaler reached out and steadied him, an automatic gesture, like catching a falling child. That is when the sleeve rode up. Lantern light slid over his wrist, and the sign showed fully, no longer a half glimpse. a bone toggle tied with dark sinew, carved with 3 quiet cuts. Beneath it, faint inked dots, old, deliberate. Not a sailor's tattoo, not a trader's charm, a mark that meant something to people who measure truth in survival and who call a man's worth by what he shares when he is hungry. Scarthroat stared, as if the cold had finally reached his brain. The pistol sagged. "You!" His voice snapped thin. "That can't be." The chewer stepped back. "I've seen it," he whispered. "Up the coast. A story about a Kalunak who should have drowned, but didn't." One hunter murmured a single Inuktitut word that made the air heavier. Ilagiit, family. And another quieter, like a rule. Pikatigi inik, together. The whaler pulled his sleeve down, but it was too late. The outlaws were no longer looking at a poor old whaler. They were looking at a man claimed, protected, yes, but also bound. Scarthroat tried to rebuild his courage out of anger. "So what? You wear their mark and think you're untouchable?" A voice answered from behind them, calm as snow settling. The elder had arrived without sound, a small quillic flame sheltered in a tin cup, his eyes fixed on Scarthroat. "It does not make him untouchable," the elder said. "It makes him accountable." He stepped closer. "A mark is memory. It means someone once shared their last warmth with him. Someone fed him when feeding another could have killed them. That debt sits on the bones. You break it and the land remembers you as a thief, not a man." Scarthroat's throat worked. "I can still take him." The elder's gaze did not change. "You can try. But understand what you're stealing from. Not one man, many hands. People who travel by Kamutik, who hear the ice, who find you when the wind erases your tracks." The chewer looked toward the ridge and finally understood why the bay had felt alive. It wasn't superstition. It was community. Quiet watchers spaced like cairns, a net you only see when it tightens. Scarthroat tightened his grip on the pistol again, not with courage but desperation. The old whaler met his eyes once. "If you want to test that mark," he said quietly, "do it in daylight, where everyone can see what kind of man you are." Scarthroat backed away like a man stepping off thin ice, already planning a strike that wouldn't look like his doing. The outlaws stumbled back toward the post as if the ice itself had shoved them. They didn't speak loud anymore. They didn't spit jokes. Their boots kept finding the same cautious rhythm because every step now felt watched. That was the contradiction that haunted Scarthroat. Nobody had threatened him with a rifle, yet he'd never felt more cornered. By the next morning, the bay looked ordinary again. Flat white, a ribbon of dark lead where tide breathed, smoke lines from low roofs. Somewhere in the village, a drumbeat started and stopped, steady as a pulse. "We are awake." The Inuit did not gather to argue. They did not march to the trading post with raised voices. They answered the way the North answers, with placement, with patience, with control. On the ridge above the outpost, 2 figures appeared at first light, spaced far apart like Inuksut guiding travelers. They didn't move much. They didn't need to. A watcher is a message. Below, a dog team was harnessed and left standing in the open. Runners pointed toward the only safe route across the sea ice. Not blocking it, just owning it. Near the shore, a kajak slid into the narrow lead, silent as a shadow. Another followed, then an umiak farther out, oars barely kissing the water. The Kalunat traders barely noticed. To them it was just natives out early. But to anyone raised by Sila, it was the closing of doors. If the outlaws tried to flee by water, there would be eyes. If they tried to cut inland, there would be tracks waiting to be read. Inside the post, trade slowed in a way the clerk couldn't explain. A line of Inuit buyers formed, calm and polite, and somehow the outlaws always ended up last. Rope ran out. Lamp oil was promised. Even a cheap knife changed price the moment Scarthroat touched the counter. No one accused them. No one shouted. The outlaws simply felt the air turn against them, like wind shifting before a storm. The old whaler kept his head down, repairing a strap for a kamutik as if nothing had happened. A putti passed him a small bundle, dried char, a strip of seal fat, without meeting his eyes. Not charity. A circle returned. He felt the room watching that exchange, and he felt the outlaws watching harder. The elder arrived before noon. He didn't sit at the counter. He stood near the qulliq, where the heat was honest, and he spoke quietly to the Inuk men who drifted in and out as if by accident. A hand touched a shoulder, a nod toward the bay. A boy ran a message. No speeches, no declarations. Pikatigi Inik in motion, many small actions forming one decision. Scarthroat tried to buy a man's loyalty with coin. The dockhand he approached only shrugged and glanced at the window, where the ridge watchers were still there. "Not worth it," the dockhand said, voice low. "You can't bribe weather." That afternoon the wind rose and then fell again, as if testing the ice. The whaler stepped outside and saw how the village had shifted without fanfare. Dogs moved to new lines, barrels turned to face inward, the safest path marked by fresh ice chips like pale beads. An invisible net, tightening with calm hands. He found the elder near an inuksuk by the shore. "I didn't ask for this," the whaler said. The elder's eyes stayed on the bay. "You did not ask for the mark either," he replied. "But once you carry it, you carry a lagit. Family. And family does not watch one of its own be hunted." Behind them, Scarthroat stood half-hidden by a barrel stack, listening. His fingers touched the rope-burn scar on his throat, as if it suddenly itched with memory. He stared at the whaler's covered wrist and swallowed hard, because he finally remembered where he'd heard of that mark, and why the story always ended with a name nobody dared say out loud. Scarthroat did not sleep. He sat behind the storehouse with his pistol across his knees, watching the bay as if the ice might confess. The ridge watchers never approached him. They simply remained, and that steadiness scraped his nerves worse than a threat. Near midnight he saw the old whaler leave the post alone, lantern hooded, walking toward the inuksuk above the shore. Scarthroat followed, boots placed careful, breath held. The whaler knelt beside the stones and lit a small qulliq flame inside a tin cup, shielding it from the wind. Then he spoke into the dark in Inuktitut, the words shaped slow, respectful. "Kujanamik," he said. "For that night." Scarthroat's throat tightened. He had heard that word before he had earned the scar. A voice answered from the shadow of the inuksuk. The elder stepped forward. "You still speak it," he said. "I never forgot it," the whaler replied. Scarthroat shifted, crunching the crust. Lantern light found the rope-burn line across his throat. Both men looked at him, and the elder's eyes narrowed. Not anger, recognition. "You," the elder said, and the single syllable carried years. Scarthroat forced a grin. "Don't look at me like that." The elder raised one hand, palm outward, the gesture used to calm a dog team before thin ice. "Let the past speak," he said. The whaler drew his wrist from his sleeve and showed the bone toggle fully. 3 quiet cuts, dark sinew, a bond, not fashion. "I earned this," he said, "not by buying it, by living when I should have died." He stared out over the bay, and his voice pulled up an older winter. His whaling boat had been crushed in a squeeze of pack ice. 2 men were taken. He was thrown onto a floe with broken ribs and no fire. Sela turned brutal, and he waited for the dark to finish him. Then came the creak of a kamutik. An Inuit family traveling between camps had seen wreckage and followed it the way hunters follow a seal's breathing hole. They did not ask if he was Kalunak. They saw a living man and the rule answered for them. They dragged him under hides, warmed him at a qulliq, fed him broth, and stayed when fever came, keeping the flame alive. Before he left, the woman pressed this toggle into his hand. A reminder, you live because we chose you to live. So choose others. Scarthroat's face drained. "Stop," he whispered, but the whaler didn't. "When I tried to pay," the whaler continued, "they refused coin. They asked for one thing, tell the truth, that we share because we must and because it is right." The elder's gaze stayed on Scarthroat. "And you were there," he said. Scarthroat's jaw jumped. "I was a kid with a gun," the elder replied softly. "A kid taken in for one night when your crew left you. You watched a family share their last fat, and then you told traders where their camp was." Scarthroat clutched his scar as if it burned again. "I didn't mean—" "You meant to survive," the whaler said. So did they. The wind pushed through, making the lantern tremble. Scarthroat's eyes shone, rage and shame fighting for the same space. They never knew it was me. We knew, the elder said. We chose to let the land decide the timing. Scarthroat lifted his pistol a fraction, then lowered it. For the first time, his fear wasn't dying, it was being seen clearly, and the whaler leaned closer, voice almost gentle. You came to steal from me, he said, but you were really chasing proof you could outrun what you did. You can't, not here. Far across the bay, a dog howled once, long and low, like a signal carried through bone. Scarthroat flinched, because he finally understood. The net around him wasn't anger. It was a verdict forming, slow, precise, and it would not need a gunshot to be final. Dawn arrived with hard, clean light that made every track on the bay look like a confession. The outlaws tried to act normal, boots loud, jokes forced, but the trading post had changed around them. Not with shouting, with absence. No one sold Scarthroat lamp oil. Dockhands looked past him as if he were already a ghost. A dog team stood harnessed near the safest route, drivers calm. On the ridge, 2 silhouettes remained, still as Inuit suit, marking not a path, but a boundary. Scarthroat decided to run anyway. He and his men dragged their half-frozen partner toward the whaling shed, where a small skiff lay hauled up. If they reached open water, they could vanish down coast before the next tide shift. He shoved the skiff, cursing as it scraped ice. The old whaler appeared without hurry, standing between shed and shoreline as if he had been there all morning. The elder was beside him. Behind them, no mob, no rifles, only people spaced wide, watching. A kajak rested in the lead. Dogs breathed clouds into the air. "You're leaving," the whaler said. "Move," Scarthroat snapped, lifting the pistol. His hand shook. "I'm done listening to your stories." The elder answered softly. "Scylla is listening too." Scarthroat fired into the air. The crack died fast, swallowed by snow. No one flinched. That frightened him more than anger would have. He yanked the skiff again, and the ice beneath it moaned. Not a sudden break, a slow surrender. The tide was turning, pushing water under the shelf ice, thinning the seam exactly where the skiff's weight pressed. The whaler had seen it hours ago. The route to escape had been left open, just far enough to tempt a man who doesn't hear the ice. The skiff slid, then dipped. Cold water surged around Scarthroat's boots, biting through leather. His partner screamed. The chewer grabbed for the gunwale, but the edge crumbled. "Rope!" the whaler called, not to his people, but to Scarthroat, because the coil sat on a barrel in plain sight. Scarthroat stared at it, then at the whaler's covered wrist. For one moment he understood. This wasn't revenge. It was a choice in the only language the North respects. Work together or be taken. He grabbed the rope. His hands fumbled. The chewer helped. They looped it around a post, hauled and dragged their partner back onto thicker ice, coughing and sobbing. No bullets, no blood, just the land making its point. When it was done, Scarthroat sagged, shaking. "So what now?" he rasped. "You want me dead?" The elder shook his head. "Death is easy. Living with what you've done is harder. You return what you stole," he said. "You pay the widow in goods, not words. And you leave this bay. If you come back with hunters of men, the ice will know your name." Scarthroat looked around at the quiet ring of faces, at the Inuksuk on the ridge, at the dogs and the kajak, and the fight drained out of him. He nodded once, small, defeated, real. By dusk, their tracks were gone down the coast, swallowed by wind. A putti came to the whaler with sealskin and a new pair of boots for her daughter. She didn't offer them like repayment. She offered them like belonging. "Ilagiit," she said softly. The whaler's eyes stung, and he hated that weakness, so he looked away toward the bay. "I'm still poor," he muttered. The elder smiled barely. "Poor men have nothing. You have a place. You have names that will speak for you when the wind tries to erase you." That night by the Kulik, the whaler let the bone toggle rest against his skin like a heartbeat. Outside, the ice sang under the moon. Old music, endless. And beyond the next headland, another stranger would soon learn the same lesson. In the far north, kindness is not soft, it is protection.